Good afternoon and welcome to this special show on ET Now. We are calling it India Revival Mission with a special focus on Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Now, Prime Minister Modi's call for self-reliance has been received with enthusiasm across the country, be it policymakers, be it corporates. They are now redrawing plans on how to make India self-reliant and resilient. Will this then be the road to revive India at a time when the world is increasingly looking to diversify its supply chain? Will India be finally able to live up to its potential as a bright spot? That's something that we will be exploring over the course of this show. We have top voices from industry, top policymakers lined up for you. Nikunj, let me take it to you. We've seen many such policies in the past. What's going to be different this time around? Because the world we live in is very different. Many countries are looking inwards. Is this an opportunity for India to really step up on the global stage, at the same time strengthening its domestic economy?
Like they say that necessity is the mother of the invention. Sometimes economic policies and the tough decisions are always taken when there is need of them. And right now, looking at how the COVID crisis has impacted both global demand and dependence on domestic economy is going to only increase. I guess it's high time that we need to prioritize India's self-dependence. Look, India has everything in abundance: demand, labor, skill and ability. However, we are still not a completely dependent country, even though we have great success in complicated and complex sectors like auto and pharma, which by far require very advanced management of both skill and engineering talent. And one of the reasons why, Chandra, we've not been really self-reliant and we still rely on imported products and technology is because of our laws, our labor laws, our taxation, our cost of capital, and also cost of land. So while this is a medical crisis, this also has been an eye-opener for policymakers back home in India. That look at the example of PPE suits. They were not made in India, but now India is not only self-reliant, we are also exporting PPE suits. So in less than 90 days, if we can really adopt and process and manufacture a important product like PPE suits. So I'm sure that as a mission, if we bat together to make India more self-dependent, not only this will revive domestic economy, it will create jobs, and it also will ensure that in today's time when every country is going to be more and more self-dominated, India will be able to take a giant leap forward. What do you need to become self-reliant, Chandra? You need availability, and I think India has everything in abundance: labor, skill and demand. So rather than looking outward, I think it's time to start looking inward. It's time to come together and perhaps give a very serious pitch for made in India and made for the world.
Right, Nikunj, as you so rightly pointed out, make in India, make for the world. That's a big aspiration for us to live up to. But do you believe the government should draw a fine line between self-reliance and self-sufficiency? There is concern that we could be turning inwards, that we could run the risk of turning the clock backwards. What do you think the government needs to do? Do we need more coherent steps, perhaps a more focused approach as far as sectors are concerned?
Chandra, I think my view is very clear that self-reliant or Aatmanirbhar does not mean that you do not import. Aatmanirbhar does not mean that you close your borders and create artificial barriers and tariffs so that nothing can come to India, and you in a sense are able to really promote local industries because you want to protect your domestic industry through artificial barriers. No, that's not the whole idea of becoming Aatmanirbhar. The idea of becoming Aatmanirbhar or self-reliant is to fix the leakage, take big steps, come up with transformational reforms, and do whatever it takes to really give a very easy stroke, a red carpet kind of an welcome for entrepreneurs and for investors and for industrialists who currently are not being able to really unleash their animal spirits in the manufacturing sector, or are not really being able to get a huge advantage of tapping the local demand, largely because of A, government policies, B, red tapeism, and C, largely because of the complexity which we have in terms of managing approvals and taxation. So the need of the hour essentially, Chandra, is to, let's say, identify certain sectors, come out with forward-looking policies, work on the labor laws, make land acquisition easy, keep the cost of capital low, so that an entrepreneur can really find commercial opportunity here. For any economy, for any industry, for any sector, Chandra, to really invite entrepreneur or to invite capital, A, you need a promise of a better future, B, you need access to land, C, you need the promise of low land. And we've typically seen that whichever sector where things have really been opened, those sectors have really been able to attract a lot of capital, whether it is road, whether it is pharma, or whether it is auto. Now imagine the potential of this is that the Ganeshas which we worship in a house are all imported from China. Can that be substituted in India? The mobile phone which you and me use essentially is all coming from China. Our air conditioning, our refrigerators which we use, everything is coming and rather been assembled in India but not made in India. So there is a long list which we will discuss as we go forward, I think, which really needs to be focused on. And my limited point here, Chandra, is that do we have the skill and the talent? And I think that is amply exhibited in two sectors, autos and pharma. Pharma is a very complex chain, and auto is again a very complex supply chain to manage. If India can really have a global footprint and have a global mark, and if we can really compete in the global market in these two complex, one engineering and second chemistry based industry, so that just tells you that our ability to scale up has actually gone just beyond IT and just gone beyond pharma.
Thank you for listing out those steps, Nikunj. As you said, the government needs to do more to make us competitive in land, labor, and we have some of these inherent strengths in pharma, auto. We've been able to demonstrate how India has been making for the world. So if we can extrapolate that to more sectors where we have potential, then sky is the limit. But we have a special message coming up from the Minister of State for Finance and Commerce, Anurag Thakur. Here's his message on what Aatmanirbhar Bharat aims to achieve, how this can help script a revival story. He recorded this exclusively for us at ET Now as we kick off this India Revival Mission campaign.
Indian economy will withstand the headwinds of COVID-19 on the foundations that were laid down in the last 6 years. Under Prime Minister Modi, consistent structural reforms, time-bound implementation, private sector participation, and real empowerment of the underprivileged will drive the future of growth and make us Aatmanirbhar. India means business in a world where it's no longer business as usual.
Thank you for that, Minister Thakur, and we will be doubling down on this effort on ET Now to bring you voices who will give us solutions.
Well, of course, one of the most important partners of India has been China, and that's largely because there are pockets, manufacturing, low-cost areas, power, machinery, auto components, and pharmaceuticals, very important, where India is dependent on China over the years has only increased. So which are some of the key categories or sectors where India's import on China has increased, and what are the numbers looking like? For all that and much more, Varun's got details. Varun.
Right, Nikunj. So, it's all well and good to talk about the opportunity that's available, but I'll just give you some data points that you can use to take your discussion further. So in auto, for example, 25% plus of components come from China. In pharma, which you and me talk about all the time, 60 to 70% of your key raw materials come from China. In agrochemical and specialty chemical, another sector we discuss a lot, 20 to 25% of your materials come from China. For utilities, 80% of the current solar equipment available comes from China. So if you look at India's overall import share, China owns 13% of Indian imports. And in some sectors like footwear, they have 90% market share in our imports. In textiles, they have 50% market share in our imports. And in machinery, 32%. So they do own a fair bit of our imports. And so that is really what we will have to change. But one thing which I would just like to say is, two things have made China less competitive in the recent past. That's the environmental troubles there. So they've had to spend a lot more to bring up their environmental infra, and that makes India more competitive. And then obviously everything that's transpired recently also makes us a little more of a preferred alternative.
Thank you for that, Varun. Hopefully, India can leverage the gaps that China has left, the weaknesses that you mentioned. Interestingly, it's impossible to even complete a piece of clothing without China because every zipper, button that's used in a garment is imported from China. But we're going to take a break at this point, but don't go anywhere. Please come back. We have two leading voices from the auto industry, Pawan Goenka from Mahindra & Mahindra as well as RC Bhagava from Maruti on the other side of this break. Welcome back to the special show India Revival Mission with a spotlight on Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Now, before going to the break, we told you about India's dependence on China in various sectors, and one of them is auto, where over 25% of components are imported from China. Can we reduce this dependence, increase local sourcing? What is the way out to reviving India by making it more self-reliant in the auto sector? On all this and more, Nikunj caught up with Pawan Goenka of Mahindra & Mahindra, a leading name in India Inc., for some answers. Listen in to this exclusive conversation.
Let me first try and put self-reliant in perspective. Self-reliant to me means that we should not be at the mercy of any other country to meet our requirements or to grow economically or socially. So self-reliant doesn't mean that we go into a cocoon. It doesn't mean that we don't import anything, because if we don't import anything, we probably won't be allowed to export anything, and that will isolate us. And the world today is a connected world. What we need to make sure is that we export more than import. And today, at least in manufactured goods, it's the other way around, where we import 25% more than what we export. And we need to turn that around and export more. But we certainly should not get into a mindset that India should stop importing completely, because there are things that others can do better than we can. And there's no reason for us to be doing things that we are not good at. We should do things that we are good at and become better at things that we are not so good at. And let's not take any sort of ad hoc knee-jerk reaction to self-reliant, because it does not mean that we don't import. It just means that we become self-reliant, not depend on others, and gradually increase our export and reduce our import.
Okay. If I look at the Indian manufacturing sector, a sector which you proudly represent, there have been only two success stories. One, autos, stroke auto ancillary, and second is pharma. Now, auto is a very complicated sector. It's a massive management of supply chain, and pharma again is a massive management of technology plus supply chain. If India has managed to excel at a global level, both in auto and pharma, how come India at a manufacturing level in other basic industries is still suffering?
See, one can look at many things, and different people may have different sort of view on it. But my view is very clear that first of all, the reason auto and pharma have succeeded the way they have succeeded, and yes, there are success stories of industries in India, is because there has been a very clear, coordinated effort between the industry and the government, where the government has supported the industry to grow, and industry has invested and has come forward to say, how do we become globally competitive? And it does not happen in one day. If I go back to auto industry to the days of when Maruti came in, we were hardly an industry. And it is over the last 30 or 40 years that we have gotten to a point where we are absolutely what one would define self-reliant. We probably import as an industry no more than 5 to 7% of what goes in our cars, and we export about that much. So we are certainly self-reliant, but it has happened step by step. If I go back to 80s, India didn't have competitiveness at all in terms of making components. And the first step was to just become competitive. The second step was to bring in technology. The third step was to start exporting. So it all happened in a very planned, and I cannot say that somebody sat down and wrote this down and said this is a strategy. But certainly if you look back and if you do a case study of how an industry has really come from nowhere to becoming a global level industry, both for pharma as well as for auto, I think you can write case studies very clearly and demonstrate what has happened. Now, we need to do the same thing for other industries. And there are some that are coming forward. For example, the mobile industry. Right now, a lot of focus on that, that's getting towards self-reliance. But there are many other industries that are fragmented, where there are no national champions. You do need large players. Of course, you need MSMEs. You need to support MSMEs. But without large players who will lead the way, it is very difficult for the industry to have the complete wherewithal, to have the competitiveness, to have the technology, to have the ability to attract markets, to ability to grow the demand. And government has to work very, very closely. And you will see the departments of government which are very proactive and supporting the industry. Those industries are moving forward and doing well. And I'm very happy to see that there's a lot more of that happening today than happening, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Now, India has a couple of obvious challenges, which is land, labor, high cost of capital, and high taxation. The taxation issue is addressed, but on the other fronts, which is land, labor, and high cost of capital, do you think we are nowhere close to what global manufacturing hubs are?
So again, Nikun, this is obviously a very major issue for us to resolve. Because I don't believe that long term, we can make Indian manufacturing competitive by imposing tariff barriers or by imposing license. Long term, we have to be able to be competitive in the market. Similarly, export cannot happen in a big way unless we are competitive at the global scale. Now, competitive means two things. One is cost, and second is technology. If we do not have the technology that is equal to best in the world, we will never be close to best in the world. And that's one area where we have to do a lot of work. And technology doesn't mean that we have to do it all ourselves. Again, self-reliant doesn't mean that we should do everything ourselves. Technology also can come from outside, can come from joint ventures, can come from licensing, can come from buying, whatever. So that's one piece. But the second piece that we really need to focus on is the cost competitiveness. Now, we have problems in many areas, which is a cause for it. Some of it the industry has to fix. Some of it the government has to come in to help the industry to fix. And I will take the top 3 or 4, and there are many. Number one, I think for India to become cost competitive is the logistic cost and infrastructure, where we are really amongst the sort of, I would say, bottom quartile of all major nations. The speed at which the cargo can move from point A to point B, especially for import and export, and the cost of moving the cargo in India is amongst the highest. And that has to come down. We have to really look at the root cause of why that is so and bring it down. Second area that makes us non-competitive is the cost of industrial power, where overall India is at a weighted average level, perhaps same as most other countries and maybe even lower. But when we look at industrial power, because of cross subsidy, India is more expensive. And in many goods, power is a significant input cost. And therefore, that makes us non-competitive. The third one, I would say, are taxes. And while we have this scheme called RoDTEP, R-O-D-T-E-P, I think recently announced a scheme, and that will help us to not import or not export taxes. But it's very important that we don't make our goods more expensive for export because of internal taxes and levies. Of course, taxes and levies have to be there. Government has to earn revenue. But we should not let that make us non-competitive. So that's sort of what the government has to focus on. But if I come back to industry, the thing that industry needs to do, the biggest problem that we have in why we are not competitive is not having a large scale. If you look at China, China was not built in one day. China was built over a decade, over 2 decades, 3 decades, with a fairly focused approach on building scale. And in manufacturing, by and large, scale you cannot sort of offset in terms of cost competitiveness. And India, in very few, auto is one example, pharma is another example where we have scale. But in many, many industries, we do not have scale. And therefore, industry has to come forward. There has to be national champions who will take a leap of faith, if I could call it, and put in investment to make large-scale infrastructure available for any given sector. So that's number one. Number two, productivity. Now, while we talk about low labor cost on a per hour basis, but I don't think India has reached the level of productivity that one requires to be truly cost competitive, and we need to focus on that. That's the responsibility of the industry.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goenka, for kickstarting this India Revival mission on a high note. And as you spoke about the various challenges that India has and what it will take to make us competitive in some of these areas in terms of cost, logistics and technology, and of course productivity. But there is one theme within the auto sector where we have a lot of reasons to be happy about, because this is where Indian players have managed to decimate competition. We're talking about the success story of India's two-wheelers. How have they done it? What kind of market share do they have compared to their global peers?
Well, it gives me great pleasure to bring on board Mr. RC Bhagava, Chairman of Maruti, India's biggest auto company, which has a dominant market share of more than 40%. Auto is one sector or one category where Indian domestic manufacturing by far is one of the most competitive in the world, and Indian companies like Maruti also have managed to export in major markets like Europe, which in a sense are very stringent when it comes to emission norms. And when you are especially exporting in a market like Europe, when you are dealing with the BMWs, the Audis and the Mercedes of the world, that just tells you that how Indian car companies are not only effective, their products are acceptable, their products are world class. And managing auto, just to bring context for our viewers here, is that managing auto, I think, is managing a very complex supply chain. It is not that one large factory where you have size and capacity and you can manufacture in bulk and keep your cost low. Manufacturing of auto involves merging and managing and a marriage of lot of complex supply chain, and Maruti is manufacturing them in Gujarat and in Delhi, which in a sense are not really large dominated port cities. So why is that Indian auto industry has been successful globally? And if Indian auto industry is successful globally, what are the parallels which can one draw in terms of taking an indication or leaf from best practices which need to be taken forward? Mr. Bhargav, what is your view on the Indian manufacturing sector? Time and again we've tried, and with the exception of auto, pharma, some gems and jewelry, and barring one or two niche engineering companies, Indian manufacturing sector in a sense has been in a doldrums.
See, it's a fairly complicated issue because it requires various changes to be made in the way the government and the political system looks upon manufacturing. It changes how the bureaucracy deals with manufacturing and the growth of industry. And it requires changes in how the entrepreneurs and managements of industry go about their business. Because over these last 60, 70 years, we have built up a whole ecosystem which is actually quite adverse to competitive manufacturing.
Mr. Bhargav, we put the spotlight on Aatmanirbhar Bharat as the way to revive the India story. What will it take for the country to achieve this?
You're absolutely right. This Aatmanirbhar mission is not what some people interpret it to mean, that shut yourself from the rest of the world and become just totally self-reliant. I think that's a total misunderstanding of what the Prime Minister has said. It actually means that we should improve our manufacturing and do a lot of manufacturing products here, which we don't do today, which we should have been able to do and which we could do. And that requires us to become more competitive and grow manufacturing, which is what we were talking about a little while back. Now, to do that, the whole manufacturing industry in India has to become at a different plane than what it has been operating all these last 70 years. To start with, let me say that it's quite evident that the manufacturing industry, if it's going to grow and become globally competitive, it has to be private sector driven. And the public sector in all these years has never been able to achieve the purpose either of growing the industry, of generating resources which it could put back into growth of industry, of developing technology, of reaching what Pandit Nehru had said the public sector should do, reach the commanding heights of the economy. Nowhere near the commanding heights. And the public sector, in a lot of cases, I don't have specific data to back this up, but I think the public sector in most cases, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's a lot of input for other industries, is actually one of the causes of higher costs of production in India.
Now, if Maruti has managed to adopt best practices, auto is a very complex, very complicated sector, Mr. Bhargav, because it involves multiple products, multiple assembly lines. You followed best practices of following zero inventory. Your margins have been constant, one of the best in the industry. So if Indian auto industry can do it, what others need to do to replicate those manufacturing practices? Because you also acquire land. You also borrow at the same cost, plus or minus here, 1%. You also have to deal with labor, and yet you are able to produce a globally competitive world-class product.
There are a whole lot of things which we have to do to make this happen. The primary objective of the company, which means management and all employees, has to be at all times to look at ways of reducing cost, reducing waste, improving productivity, and finding ways in which efficiency at any stage of the company's operations can be improved. And this is an ongoing program which is 24/7 by 365, and year after year, everybody's focus in the company is how to improve what you're doing. Now, to make this happen, the employees have to be considering themselves as a part of the organization. They must think that it is in their interest that the company becomes more efficient, lower cost, because then the company will grow. If the company grows, opportunities for all employees increase. The career opportunities open up because of expansion. The company makes more profit, and so the company can also give more and more benefits and a better quality of life to employees, which is exactly what has happened in Maruti. And therefore, all employees, including workers in Maruti, work as partners in the company, not as employees. They look that they are partners in the company. They share in what is going to happen. The management itself has kept its expenses very frugal. If you look at management expenses in Maruti and compare that with the similar kind of management expenses in much, much smaller companies, you'll find that Maruti is a much lower cost company than.
Certainly a lot that other companies can emulate from Maruti, as you highlighted. But Mr. Bhargav, Aatmanirbhar is just not being self-reliant, but also being globally competitive. If there are 3 or 4 areas that we can immediately act on and actionable ideas that you can share, what would they be? What should the government immediately focus on?
Let me put it this way. Why have we continued to import so much for our industry and not made local production? Because ultimately, if there was a good business opportunity, then somebody would have invested in that opportunity. Or if industry itself felt that they needed to make more locally than import, it would have happened. It's not happened for a couple of reasons. First thing is that because in India, industry's growth has been very small at a low rate. Manufacturing over the years has kept pace with GDP growth because we still remain 14 to 16% of the GDP which we were several decades ago. So GDP and in manufacturing has grown at the same rate. Now, at this low rate of growth, investors, and especially foreign investors, have not believed what we've been telling them, come and invest in India because we are a huge market and there's a huge potential for growth here and all that, because they don't see that growth happening. So that's one. The demand for products has grown too slowly. We need to look at that again. The cost of manufacturing in India, we've already discussed, they're much higher than what they should be. So again, that's not happening. And lastly, I think we have a system in this country where it is much easier for manufacturers of components. Let me take the automobile sector. We found that automobile component manufacturers.
So what are the challenges we should be prepared for? Because this is going to be a long road ahead. It's going to be a bumpy road ahead. Everything is not going to be on and off, because Aatmanirbharta means that you are rebooting a lot of industries. Some need infrastructure, some need skill, some need government policy intervention, and some need all.
I think everybody in the country, and that requires all political parties, must accept that today, making India a highly competitive manufacturing nation is an absolute national priority. This objective should not be subject to political wrangling and political point scoring and such things. Everybody must cooperate in this effort. Number two, that this has to be driven by the private sector, and everything which is required to make industry competitive, including changes in the public sector, including changes in our laws, including changes in the way we price inputs, including changes in the way infrastructure is managed, including maybe the way the labor is organized, because I think we are going about labor also in a wrong way, which is not a productive way. And that needs to be recognized. Thirdly, industrialists themselves have to change their behavior pattern in a manner that they can earn the trust of not only the political system and the bureaucrats, but of the people at large. Because today, the general people, I don't think, have too much trust. There are exceptions, of course. There are exceptional people in industry who are outstanding in terms of their integrity and contribution to the nation. But as a whole, I think industrialists are not considered trustworthy by the people. I think that needs to change. I think we need to understand that labor is a very, very important component of achieving productivity. And unless you manage labor so that they believe that they become partners to the company and work for that company's good, because that is in their real interest. It is, I can go into that, but there's no question today that in today's world, the real interest of labor lies in the growth and prosperity of their companies.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhagava, for sharing those insights. And there's certainly a lot that fellow industrialists and policymakers can learn from that important interview. Welcome back to the special show India Revival Mission with a spotlight on Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Now, we brought you corporate voices, leading voices from India Inc. But any story on self-reliance, on the spirit of Aatmanirbharta would be incomplete without India's space agency ISRO. What makes ISRO such a fine mascot of self-reliant India? In fact, we have a very special voice joining us, Dr. K Sivan, the chairman of ISRO. His life story is as inspiring as a space agency. Dr. Sivan, thank you so much for joining us on ET Now on the special programming of India Revival Mission. Take us through ISRO's own journey in Aatmanirbharta and self-reliance, how ISRO has managed to make so much on its own and undertake such ambitious missions in the world.
No, basically that what we are doing in the space sector, the space reliant, self-reliance, we are doing in terms of developing the new technologies. And you know that we have acquired the technologies in the launch vehicle and latest technology like cryogenic propulsion. And now we are developing on that semi-cryogenic propulsion. Already we have mastered over the liquid propulsion system, like a storable liquid system on the rocket. And we are able to launch that bigger satellite up to 4 tons. This is on the launch vehicle side. And that satellite side also, that is, we are able to make advanced satellite. Also, that is that we are able to make that launch that the high throughput satellite like GSAT 19, GSAT 29, GSAT 11, and further we are this one that thing. Then also in that Earth observation satellite also, that is we are in line with that advanced countries in terms of technology of providing that the 28 centimeter resolution. This is really in line with other countries that they have. So if you see that as a total thing, either launch vehicle or the satellite and providing the space-based services, we are fully indigenized, and our drive towards indigenization is further going with development of further developments in the launch vehicle system, satellite system and application area.
Last week, you announced that private players can also build satellites and launch rockets from Indian soil. What role is this going to play in propelling India into a big player in the world space economy or in the global space economy?
See, if you are seeing that the global space economy, that at present that it is something like $360 billion. And out of this, if you are seeing that India's contribution is only merely 3%. And it is essential to us to increase that our global space economy, our contribution to be higher level. And at the same time, we are looking for that, that the applications, space-based applications are increasing exponentially. And with the initiation of that government effort to by the Digital India program, this the requirement of the space-based applications is going to explode further. And all these things will not be handled only about by the ISRO alone. So we wanted the private players also to contribute for this space activity so that we can get more the share from the global space economy. That's the aim, and that is the effort that we are now done to enable the private players to carry out space-based activities.
But what kind of reforms will this need, sir, in terms of enabling practices in India, like what US and Europe have enabled for private players? The kind of ecosystem support, funding support, how is all that going to play out?
See, there is that regarding that the ecosystem for allowing that private players to do the job. That is, at present we have the SATCOM policy and that remote sensing policy. But that need to be slightly updated to ensure that private players are doing the job efficiently. That is number one. That we are on the job to enable the private players to do the job. At the same time, that the space activity bill, that should be introduced at the earliest. That also we are already, we have crossed the major milestone and will be coming to the point at the earliest, this one. So this type of systems will be in place so that private players can do the job without any problem with ease, this one.
Dr. Sivan, apart from conglomerates, companies such as L&T, Godrej, we're also seeing a lot of interest from budding entrepreneurs, startups, to take a larger pie of the India space story. Of course, many of them are inspired by Elon Musk of SpaceX, but what kind of enabling ecosystem are you developing to encourage some of these newer companies, some of these startups to build in the space, to build for space?
See, there is this is exactly that the in-space mechanism, whatever we are proposing, is going to do that thing. And if you are considering the space activities such as that rocket building, satellite building, launching them, and all this is involved risk and at the same time that is safety, security, and quality. And so to ensure that these things are done properly, that will be done by that in-space system, whatever we are putting. Also, if you are seeing that this part to carry out that space activities, lot of costly and involved the facilities are required. And we are ready to share that our resource facilities already we have on these activities for use by that our private players, so that they can do their business at ease. So considering all this, that a system in space, and also that in space will be going to promote that space activities by entrepreneurs, and all these things are going to enable them to carry out the space activities at ease. That is our aim. Our systems are tuned for that.
Finally, Dr. Sivan, your story itself is so inspiring. You grew up in a family, in a farming family in Tamil Nadu. You studied in a Tamil medium school, and you're the first graduate in your family. What would your advice be for youngsters in these tough times? Jobs are hard to come by. People are seeing.
I can only say that the sky is the limit, and carry out that the science team or not only science team